throughout the summer on parables, looking at these parables in their original context to get some sense of what Jesus was up to as he is telling these stories, to place them in a context by which we can better understand the message that Jesus has in these parables for the disciples in that time and for us in this time. And last week we began looking at this parable. We began to understand it in its original context. We took last week not to really get into the message of the parable, but to situate it in a context by which we could really see what was happening. We talked about how so much of our translation of the text has been altered by people who have substituted words here and there that we have been taught to think of as interchangeable. Lord's Prayer, when we pray, "Forgive us our debts," is what the translation is, but we have translated it "trespasses," thinking that really benign switch, a switch that doesn't have much to do with anything, but coming to understand that the difference between debts and trespasses is almost as big as the difference between night and day. That is, that when we switch from talking about debts to trespasses, we are no longer talking about economic activity, but we are talking about now actions against one another. And so that switch is a way that people in power have manipulated or misused the Bible in order to blind us from the morality that is implied in economic transactions. In other words, my brothers and sisters, that people in power have changed the way the Bible is translated to make it harder for us to offer a biblical critique around a failed economic system that oppresses so many people. When this parable, and in fact many of the parables that Jesus was teaching, was a clear economic message about the political and economic oppression of the people of the day in a way that they would have understood what was happening. And so to take this parable now in its new context and to understand it, let me remind you that what we're talking about is not an exchange between a landowner and a leasee or a renter of the land. This is not the exchange between a banker and somebody who has come in for a loan. That the slave mentioned in this text does not owe a debt to the king because he has taken out a debt for himself, for his own personal use or personal needs. It is not because he lacked money and was trying to get a debt to cover the difference between what he owed and what he had. It's not because he was ambitious and was trying to finance a project and needed money ahead of time in order to be able to secure the financing of the project. No, what we are seeing here is the exchange between a boss and a middle manager. We are seeing the exchange between somebody who has made their fortune and their political presence by assuming the debt of others or extending loans to others and has hired a field of bureaucrats, of middle managers, a field of people who could read and write, whose responsibility was to manage those debts, to make sure that there was good accounting of what people owed and that those what people owed was collected on time. Because of this system, my brothers and sisters, they did not have insurance the way we do today, so that banks are insured so that if they lose money, the insurance covers their losses. There was no insurance policy for these individuals at this time, so they took on this at great risk to themselves. If people could not pay, they could find themselves in financial ruin, and people who were aspiring to move up the ladder could very easily tumble off the ladder if the people beneath them did not pay their debts in a timely manner. And so, in order to insure against this, my brothers and sisters, because whether you know it or not, people who are in power always try to find ways to protect themselves from falling out of that power. They always change and rewrite the rules so that they take as little risk as possible, and most of the risk falls on us. my brothers and sisters, which is why in our nation today we don't have a draft, because the people who sit in Congress, the people who would be responsible for declaring war, the people who are using America's military might around the country as they see fit, don't want their children to be involved in those wars unnecessarily, and so they don't have a draft anymore. They use the military as an option for people who are poor and cannot afford an education, or who need health care, or need a way of providing a substantial income to be able to risk their lives to fight wars that people who are not in relationship with them declare, my brothers and sisters. That's why we got rid of the draft, because people in power changed the rules to benefit them. And so the people in power in this time changed the rules so that they, even though they assumed on paper the debt, they did not assume in fact the debt, because the debt was transferred to these middle managers whose responsibility it was to collect it. So if, my brothers and sisters, if I were the king and you were managers, you would not just be responsible for getting money that other people owed. By taking on that responsibility, you assumed that debt yourself, which means if you could not collect it from somebody else, you were responsible for paying it out of your own money. You had personal responsibility for that debt. And now I know somebody's asking, who on earth would take such a job? Who on earth would take such a risky proposition to be responsible for collecting a debt that was owed to somebody else, so you're not really benefiting off of it, but you are responsible for it? So who would take a job with such a low upside and such a high downside? And what I would tell you, my brothers and sisters, is that relative to the other jobs that were available at this time, this was considered one of the best. The political economy at this time, my brothers and sisters, was such that this was one of the safest and most protected jobs, that people aspired to jobs like this. Only those who could read or write, which was a very small segment of the population, could even take these jobs, because they were the only ones who could keep books. My brothers and sisters, by doing this, if you did it well, you were able to build up a little bit of power for yourself, a little bit of relative ease for yourself. You were able to control to some extent your own income, because you could, again, overcharge people for their debts and skim a little bit off the top. This was part of the way the system was designed. It was designed, my brothers and sisters, to keep people at each other's throats, because if you're worried about me trying to steal from you in order to pay somebody else, you're less worried about the person who's collecting the debt, who you owe the debt to, than the person who is collecting. And so it was designed to keep people who did not have power at odds with one another, fighting with one another, going to war with one another, and blind to the people who was really controlling the power. So this job, my brothers and sisters, it was better than being a day laborer. It was better than waiting by the side of the road to see if somebody needed something to move, to see if somebody needed crops to be harvested, to see if somebody needed a house to be built, if somebody needed your physical labor, and then being subject to earning whatever they chose to pay you for that. It was easier than doing that. It was easier, my brothers and sisters, than begging in a time when there was no safety net or social construct to protect those who were the least and the most vulnerable, my brothers and sisters. There were not a lot of options, and if you did not have a trade, if you were not a carpenter or a fisherman and knew how to work with your hands, if you were not an artisan, my brothers and sisters, then this was one of the best jobs that was available. So this slave, this economic bureaucrat, this middle manager, my brothers and sisters, has worked hard for most of his life to get to this position, has come to a trusted position, and right there in the text, my brothers and sisters, I know it's hard to see, but if you look carefully, this slave, this middle manager, tries to pull a fast one. It's really quick, it's really subtle, my brothers and sisters, but the Bible says, Jesus says in this parable, that the king came to collect the debt. And this slave, this middle manager, says, I do not have the ability to pay the debt. And so this was part of the way that this corrupt system worked, my brothers and sisters, because the kings could only be as powerful as the control they exerted on their slaves. And sometimes slaves try to get a little bit more power by trying to pull a little bit of a power card on the king, to try to prove to the king that the king was not as powerful as the king thought he was. And so here now is this slave trying to pull one on the king. The king comes to collect the debt, and the slave says, I'm not paying the debt today. I can't pay the debt today. And so the king, wrestling with how to exert his authority, because if he lets this slave who has risen to this top level because of his efficiency and effectiveness, if he lets him get away with this, the people beneath him are going to start to bubble and rebel. And so he has to find a way to assert his authority in the situation. So he orders the slave to be, if you can't pay the debt, then fine, I'm selling you, I'm selling your family, I'm selling all of your property, and I'll use that money to pay the debt. This slave who has tried to increase his power, being very quickly reminded of the vulnerable situation he is really in, that his perceptions of power are merely an illusion, that he really does not have as much control as he thought he had in the situation, being quickly brought back to earth, my brothers and sisters, takes the position that the custom, the oppressive custom of the time dictated he should take in the first place, and that is on his knees before the king, begging for his life in existence. Please don't sell me or sell my family. Please just give me time. I'll be able to pay it. Now, the fact that he knows he'll be able to pay such a large debt, an unimaginably large debt, a debt larger than anybody could have foreseen being able to make most people in a lifetime, means that he had at least part of the money stashed away somewhere. And instead of coming forth with the money that he had, he was trying to sit on it for something else. Please, just give me a little bit of time. I'll be able to pay the debt. And so now the king, having his authority reestablished, is able to let the man off the hook. Now, he would have done well. The king would have done okay just to allow his position to be reestablished, just to allow his power to be reasserted. The story would have gone out to everyone who heard it, that the slave tried to pull the fast one on the king, and the king threatened to sell him, and the slave got back in place. And everything would have been restored to its rightful place. But the king takes an additional step. And not only does he cancel the sale order, but he forgives the man the debt. And so this is the question I've been wrestling with throughout the week, my brothers and sisters. Why would the king forgive the debt? What is the king up to in this act of forgiveness? The king has reestablished his position. He is the head man in charge, and he knows, everybody knows now not to mess with this king. Why would he take the extra step to forgive the debt? The fact that it was such a large debt means more money would have been coming into his coffers. What is he hoping to get in exchange that would be greater than the money he would have collected for the debt? My brothers and sisters, there is this series of movements that are happening in this time. Because the truth is, very few liked the system they were under. The Roman system worked really well if you were Roman. And even better if you were Roman and were an aristocrat. But for everybody else who was not Roman, the system did not work well for you. Everybody else was relegated to being second-class citizens. Even King Herod, who has enough power in this book of Matthew that he is able to order the death of children trying to find baby Jesus when he is born. Herod's power is limited to the power that Rome allows him to have. And so Herod's skill, his ability to gain power, is part his military strength. He is able to go out and fight, but it's part his ability to kiss up to those who are higher than him. And my brothers and sisters, I don't know if you've ever been at a job or worked in a position or been in a place where you have to kiss up to somebody higher than you just for your existence, just to be able to make a piece of a paycheck, my brothers and sisters. But that's no way to live. It's a hard existence to be able to work out, to feel like you have to bury a piece of yourself just to get by. To feel like you have to leave an important piece of you at home in the morning because you can't take it to work. Because if you showed up as yourself at work, then there would be problems and repercussions. That's a difficult existence to have, my brothers and sisters. It's an existence that many of us, many of our forefathers and foremothers, our parents and our grandparents, our brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles, and even our friends and family now experience being black in this country that does not celebrate, appreciate, or understand blackness, my brothers and sisters, is that for so many of us, just to be able to get a paycheck to make our ends, at least be able to look at each other if they can't meet, in order just to be able to create some type of existence in this world. It costs so much personally and emotionally to be able to do that, my brothers and sisters, that it's no wonder that there are so many people who are black, who experience mental and emotional trauma, my brothers and sisters, because it's hard living out here. It's why so many people celebrate that great scholar, philosopher, and theologian Tupac Shakur, whose music talked about the existential challenge of blackness in America, trying to stay legit, trying to pay the rent, trying to make $1 out of 15 cents. My brothers and sisters, this is the type of existence that everybody who was not Roman was experiencing in this world, my brothers and sisters. And so everybody had a dream of trying to overthrow the system. And especially people who came out of this Old Testament tradition, this Jubilee tradition, this tradition where debts were forgiven and order was restored, where economic justice and liberty was possible. This was a part of how they dreamed. And so this king, my brothers and sisters, I believe is forgiving the debt of this slave. Because he is trying to inspire a type of loyalty out of this slave and others around him, that he wants them to be more loyal to him than they are to the system around him, my brothers and sisters, that he is trying to advance his cause as a revolutionary or messianic leader, trying to deliver people out of their bondage. He wants people who are willing to rise up and fight for him in order that he might rise in power, with the belief that as he rose in power, that their liberation would become more extensive. In his imagination, my brothers and sisters, that as soon as he releases this slave from his debt, word would spread around his little piece of the empire that this king right here was a good king. This king was a just king. This king was a noble king. This king was worthy of fighting for. This king forgave the debts. This king remembered what Jubilee was supposed to be about. Let us rally together. Let us gather together. Let us have a parade to celebrate this king. And then let us go to this king's enemies and vanquish his enemies so that this king can be more powerful. And then God's economic justice will be made worldwide. Let us fight for this king. This was what he imagined would happen in his mind. He was already planning the parade route that would take when people heard about the good things that happened. He was already celebrating the victory in his mind when word gets back to him from other slaves that this slave that he had just forgiven has gone out and has not extended that forgiveness to somebody else, but has actually gone and done what he had always done. Because that slave was not personally invested in the political aspirations of his master. That slave had his own issues he had been dealing with. And what it cost him to be able to win back his freedom, what it cost him to be able to win back his debt, the position he had to take on his knees before his master had cost him something personally, and he had to go find a way to get that back. And the way he went and got that back was to go find the first slave who owed him money. As if to say to the rest of the world, he might be able to put me on my knees. But don't forget, I got power over the rest of y'all. Yeah. My brothers and sisters, when we talk about in the black community, people that come to a little bit of power and forget where they came from, people who rise up to a little bit of position and tend to forget that they were born in the same communities that we were born in, that we knew their mama, that some of us raised them, that we remember when they were running around here nappy-headed with mismatched socks, my brothers and sisters, and now that they've gotten a little position, a little power, they act like they brand new out here, like they didn't grow up in the Laurel homes, or they didn't grow up in Lincoln Heights, that they didn't grow up in the West End, and they didn't grow up in Avondale. They act like they lived out in Indian Hill all their life, like they was born in Hyde Park. They act like that Forest Park was where they came from, rather than whether they moved to, trying to escape their background. When folks act brand new, my brothers and sisters, in large part it is because they have been beaten up by a system so long that they're trying to get right within themselves. They are trying to make themselves right by extending that to somebody else. I can't fight the person above me, so I'm definitely going to fight the people around me. I don't have any power against the person who is making my life miserable, but I can take out my misery on other people. The slave, my brothers and sisters, was not awash in the warmth of the liberation of the master. The slave was reacting to what that liberation cost him personally. It was going out and doing his job the way he had always done his job. He wasn't acting different in the system, my brothers and sisters. He was doing what the system required of him in order to survive in that system. It's why, my brothers and sisters, for me, the conversation we have around our policing is too shallow of a conversation, because we are talking about how do we fix individual cops. And I believe the problem is not individual cops. The problem is a system of policing that requires police to act in a certain way in order to be accepted or respected or to rise up in the ranks. There is a certain zero tolerance, us against them. The community is dangerous, and you have to be ready at all times to respond to the danger that lurks in the community behind every door, around every alley. You have to always be on guard against this community that is out to get you. So when you go out at the beginning of your shift, they tell you don't get captured because there is an evil out there that is always against you. And so whenever you see something that feels like disrespect, it isn't just you're processing it as disrespect, you're processing it as a threat because it's the way you've been taught to process it, my brothers and sisters. And so that no matter how many cops get suspended or fired, or even if they start charging cops, we're not going to fix the system until we fundamentally change the way the policing system is designed to interact with the community. We have to, my brothers and sisters, reimagine that protect and serve ought to apply to everyone in the community. Yes. And not just to the richest, most powerful people. This middle manager, this slave, goes out and he does exactly what he has been taught to do, what he has been trained to do. He does exactly what has gotten him to his position of power. And the king, because now that the king has gotten to some privilege, to some power, to some position where he imagines he might be able to incite revolution, now that the king's agenda has changed, he has no use for the slave acting as the slave had acted to get the king where he was. And so now the king puts a worse torment on the slave than he threatened in the beginning. My brothers and sisters, this parable is a parable about the insufficiency of revolutionary change within a corrupt system. You can't reform a broken system, is what Jesus is saying. You cannot hope that people who are caught up in a broken system for their own existence and survival can fix the system. You have to bring change from outside of the system. Looking for messianic leaders who could rise to privilege of position and power, who could amass enough wealth and military might to be able to free all of those who needed to be freed, was a futile task, is what Jesus is saying. That all of these people who are trying to be these messianic leaders, all of these people who are coming trying to deliver the people, everybody who's coming out saying, I am your Savior, I am your hope, trust in me, all of these people are insufficient because they can't deliver you from a system that they themselves are beholden to. My brothers and sisters, it is, when we look at our political system, I have wondered, how is it that the same cities, the same counties, the same people who voted for Barack Obama voted for Donald Trump? Because what we did not see, I know this is what news people want to tell us, but what we did not see was a surge of white nationalists that voted that brought Trump into the White House. Trump was not elected by a surge of white nationalist voters. Trump was elected by the same people who elected Barack Obama, largely. How is that possible? That you would look at these two candidates who on the surface seem to be very different and vote for one and then vote for the other. And part of the reason, my brothers and sisters, is because Trump's message, where Trump's message overlapped President Obama's message, was in, I am not a part of this broken system. And so if you elect me, you are electing change. And so Trump tapped into that same frustration, that same heartbreak that helped propel Barack Obama to office. And he pointed out the flaws, the foibles of his opponent who was entrenched in a political system. And said, don't vote for this person who has been a part of this system for the last 30 years. Vote for me, who has never held a public office. Vote for me, who's never been an elected official. I don't have anybody that I owe anything to in the system. I don't have anybody that I'm connected to in the system. So vote for me, because I'll drain the swamp. And the people who are caught up in this broken system, the people who are looking for change, people who are on all kinds of economic levels, who realize that the system is broken for them, voted for Trump because they believed he could deliver the change they wanted. My brothers and sisters, not clearly understanding, and some people still hoping and waiting for that change, not understanding, my brothers and sisters, that change cannot be handed down to us. That any time we expect somebody else to rise to a position and hand us change, we misunderstand what is happening, because whatever it costs them to get there, no matter how good they are, no matter how much we love them, whatever it costs them to get there dictates how much power they really have once they arrive. And so even if they want to bring about revolutionary change, they are restricted within the confines of the system to change it. And so, my brothers and sisters, I hear somebody saying, well, Pastor, if that's the case, if we can't elect our way into the system, then do we have any hope? If a person and a president as good as Barack Obama was can't deliver us from this mess, do we have any hope? If one of the greatest leaders we've seen in our era, Dr. Martin Luther King, could not deliver us, do we have any hope? My brothers and sisters, and what I want to tell you is that the hope that Jesus speaks about is not the hope of waiting for somebody to come and deliver you. It's not a hope of waiting until an event happens, not even waiting for Jesus himself to come and deliver you. My brothers and sisters, that notion that we just simply have to wait on God to fix this was not the message that Jesus preached. This is a reinterpretation of the message to pacify us, to stop us from our activity. What Jesus was about, the way he lived, the way he moved, the way he operated, the message he preached was about us living into that hope ourselves. The hope does not come top down, my brothers and sisters. Deliverance cannot come top down. Freedom from oppression cannot come from the top down. It is why, as the psalmist says, we do not look to the hills from where our help, but where does our help come from? Our help comes from the Lord. My brothers and sisters, and how does God bring about change? God brings about change through our hands, through our feet, through our actions, in the way that we live, in the way that we love, that every step we take towards God, that every step we take towards love, that every step we take towards justice, that every step we take to resist the oppressive messages that are put on us, but to find ways to love one another a little bit stronger, to hold one another a little bit closely, to find joy even in the midst of darkness, to find ways of being together with one another, even with everything telling us that we ought to be apart, that every step we take in that direction, my brothers and sisters, as a step we take in actualizing our own liberation. My brothers and sisters, I would argue that if Jesus simply were telling people to wait on a cataclysmic event, to wait on an apocalyptic event, to wait on some divine disaster to come and liberate the people, then they never would have touched Jesus. But the reason Jesus is crucified, my brothers and sisters, is because Jesus went out to the wilderness to hold a revival, and 5,000 men, not to count the men, 5,000 men, not to count the women and children, came out to listen to Jesus. People left the cities to come out and flood, and they said, hold up, this person is building up a little bit too much power. That even when Jesus healed people and he told them, don't tell anybody what I did. Shh. don't say anything. They still went out and they put it on their version of Twitter or Facebook or posted it on their version of Instagram, my brothers and sisters. They did not keep it to themselves. And so these rumors, these stories, these accounts of Jesus grew, my brothers and sisters, that when Jesus is going in to Jerusalem to hold a Passover, my brothers and sisters, that very parade, that this king imagines would be his, that parade that Herod wanted for himself, that parade that probably Pontius Pilate wanted for himself, that parade that every leader who imagined they could usurp the person ahead of them and get a little bit more power wanted, the people were willingly giving Jesus. And that's why the Pharisees say, shh, shut up, tell the people to be quiet. Not because they were embarrassed religiously, but because they were scared politically, because they knew that people would be envious of the attention that Jesus was getting. And they were afraid about how it would benefit or how it would befall them, my brothers and sisters. That Jesus, the radical message of Jesus, what makes it so that Jesus has to be crucified is that Jesus teaches people to love and to build community with one another no matter what Roman oppression says. And in that system, my brothers and sisters, in a system where people love one another, where they care for one another, where they live and eat and take care of one another, where if my brother gets caught up in a system and can't pay his debts, I'm willing to sell my property in order to get him out because that's how connected I am to my brother. In that type of system, I can't create division. And if I can't create division, then there is a threat that you all might look at me and realize that I'm the one between you and liberation, and you all might come for me. And so Jesus becomes a threat that has to be exterminated because he is bringing people together. Not to passively wait on a divine event, but to create the momentum for their own liberation amongst themselves. And so they took Jesus, they arrested him. They didn't have anything to charge him with, so they hired people to tell lies on Jesus. They lied about what he said and lied about what he did. They lied about Jesus, my brothers and sisters. And even then, they couldn't find a jury to convict Jesus. And so they sent him from one court to the other. Pilate says, we can't convict him in this court, so send him over to Herod's court. Herod said, I don't want to hear this case in my court, so he sent it back to Pilate's court. And when Pilate couldn't find a reason to convict him, he went and talked to Jesus himself and said, is what the people are saying about you true? And Jesus said, you've heard it. What do you think? And Pilate himself couldn't find a reason to convict him, so Pilate tried to let Jesus off the hook. But the people were so incensed, they were so afraid, people wanted to hold on to their power so much that they demanded Jesus be crucified. So Jesus hung on a cross from the 6th to the 9th hour, my brothers and sisters. He hung on the cross till the sun refused to shine. He hung on the cross till the earth itself began to shake, my brothers and sisters. And Jesus died there on that cross. But the beauty in the story, my brothers and sisters, is not about the crucifixion, but it is about the inability of Rome, even through the threat of death, to stop God's revolutionary activity. Because even though they could kill Jesus, my brothers and sisters, the Bible said that on the third day that Jesus got up from the grave with all power in his hands. My brothers and sisters, and so that ought to encourage us to be radical in how we live and radical in how we love, radical in how we come together, that no matter what this president does, or no matter how many lies this government tells, no matter how they try to separate us or demonize us or look down at us or say that we are not worthy, that we are not beautiful, that we are not strong, that we remember that we are, because we are made in God's image, and the very God who fashioned us out of the best material that God had, the very God that kissed our own beautifully melanated skin with God's own Son, the very God who fashioned our hair in the strength and the texture of lamb's wool, the we can come together and love together and work together, not to wait for someone to liberate us, but to liberate ourselves. This parable, my brothers and sisters, is a call. It is Jesus begging the people to cast off the illusion that deliverance happens somewhere else, that it's someone else's responsibility or duty or somebody else's call to save us, but to remind us that we have the obligation to work for our own liberation. And so then Jesus' call, Jesus is imploring for us to forgive one another, is a part of how we work to build the radical commitment to one another, to enable one another to be able to fight together for the liberation that we so desperately need. We have a practice here at Beloved Community Church that we call response to the word. It's our way of acknowledging that God does not just speak through me, because I'm the one up here with the microphone, but that God desires to speak to and through each and every one of us. So we take a moment and we say, God, what is it that you are saying to me? What is it that you have for me to do? And when we ask that question, we don't just keep the answer to ourselves, but we turn to a friend or a neighbor and we share with them what God is sharing with us.